Okay, so we're gonna try and get through the Poimander or the Poimandres tonight if we can. There was a big thing that I missed in the last episode, which I was reminded of by a commenter. Wolf in the Breast, I believe, is the commenter. And they, them, I'm not sure the gender of the individual, informed me that the seven spheres, which is mentioned in the Poimandres, the Poimander, here, let's see if I can find where we were, where he mentions the seven spheres and man being made in this sort of domain of these seven spheres. But he, seeing and understanding the creation of the workman in the whole, would needs also himself fall to work, and so was separated from the Father, being in the sphere of generation or operation. Having all power, he considered the operations or workmanships of the seven, but they loved him, and every one made him partaker of his own order. Okay, so this is correlating to the seven stars in the cosmos. What I am a little confused about, which actually no, this makes sense. So the seven spheres would be the Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, and each one of these carries some sort of character trait with it. These are the planets which have spirits imbued to them. The planets are the material sort of forms, but the spirit within them is this immortal being of itself, and they carry out the operations of the gods. And so I want to turn here to Corpus Hermeticum, book 16. This is Asclepius to King Ammon. And a note about this, which is kind of funny, is the beginning of this book starts off with with Asclepius telling this King Ammon that we need to make sure that this text never gets translated to that brutish language Greek, because it'll, as Hermes has instructed Asclepius, which I haven't mentioned to you, as a lot of these dialogues, there's a whole section called the Asclepius, which is Hermes explaining things to his student Asclepius in Tat, about the things that are. Okay? So, but this is Asclepius telling Ammon about Hermes' teachings. And so he says that Hermes has instructed him to try to write as plainly as possible and explain things as clearly as can be done. However, within this, there is the explicit and implicit side of the text. But he says that all this will be ruined if it ever gets translated into Greek. Now, as to whether this was ever the source text of this, I don't believe was this Egyptian tongue. I could be wrong about that. I'll have to do some digging on that. There's faint flickings in my brain of hearing that this is kind of a sort of a little trick going on here. This was probably originally written in Greek, I could be wrong about that, so don't take my word for it. But I just thought that was kind of funny that he would put that in there. Okay, so we'll start off saying that the sun is the Hermetic Demiurge, essentially. It is the creator God in a way. And all of the rest of the stars are subservient to the sun, because the sun is the organizing faculty of the cosmos in Hermeticism. And so it describes the sun as being this sort of pilot of a ship, or a driver of a chariot, sort of reminiscent of the chariot driver in the Phaedo, the Phaedrus. Of course, that was a little different. That's more talking about the types of souls, the appetitive and the spirited, controlled by the rational. But this is just reminded me of that a little bit. But anyways, we'll start here. In this way, everything is created. The sun bestows on the immortals their everlasting life, and he nourishes the eternal regions of the cosmos with the ascending light sent forth from the side that faces heaven, with the descending light that illuminates the entire hollow realm of water, earth, and air. He enlivens and sets in motion birth and death. That's the sun. Now let's jump forward here. Around him are many choirs of spiritual powers, like many different armies. They dwell together and are not far from the immortals. Assigned to the region of men, they oversee their affairs. They carry out the commands of the gods with tempests, hurricanes, whirlwinds, with volcanoes and earthquakes, avenging impiety with famine and wars. And we'll go ahead and read this. Choirs, because they are many different kinds of powers. They are set in formation under the stars and are equal in number to them. Thus arrayed, they serve each of the stars. Okay? They cause a variety of disorders, both publicly in cities and among nations, but also in the life of individuals, for they shape our souls after themselves and arouse them by residing in our sinews, in our marrow, veins, and arteries, and even in our brain, penetrating as deep as our very entrails. The spirits who are set as attendants beneath each star, according to what each birth merits, take possession of each one of us at the moment we are born. So this is the idea of the natal daemon, or your star sign, kind of. So each individual is born under these sort of types of spirits, and that's what he's saying in the Poimander. This is an important part, though. But the rational part of the soul stands free of the tyranny of these powers and remains fit to receive God. So these powers, these stars have power over the sublunary world, and life and the things going on Earth are directly influenced by this cosmos. But the rational philosopher who has a connection with Nous is able to break free of these spheres of destiny and necessity and kind of harness them in order to reunite with God. For no spirit or God has any power against one ray from the supreme God, but all other men are born and led, both soul and body, by the powers whose activities they dearly love. This control Hermes called destiny. Thus the spiritual world depends upon God and the physical world on the spiritual. And through the spiritual and physical world, the Son receives from God a flow of consciousness that is of creative power. Around the Sun are the 8 spheres who depend on it. First is the sphere of the fixed stars, then the 6 of the planets, and the one that encircles the earth. The spiritual powers depend on the spheres, and men upon the spiritual powers. Thus all things and all men are dependent upon God. And here's an important part too. Through these instruments, God by himself creates all this, and all things partake of God. Since this is so, they are God. Therefore, in creating all things, he creates himself, and he can never cease to create, for he himself never ceases to be. As God has no end, so his handiwork has neither beginning nor end. Very, very interesting. And pretty edgy to say that man is essentially God, is a emanation from God. And nature is sort of, this is part of the idea of the one, right? And the one always creating, right? He says in here that if God were to be absent in a sort of deist way, where God sort of creates everything and then goes in to buy cigarettes and never comes back, Hermes here says that this would lead to a complete chaotic dissolution, because God is fundamental to being itself. Nothing would be if it weren't for God making it thus. But the ones who get lost within the material and the love of the body, as he's going to say in here, those are the ones who cannot reunite with this divine one, which is the ground of being. They cannot truly be. They can only move towards death. And so they are sort of punished. And in here it's going to say that they will be punished by this sort of, this calls it a demon, by some sort of spirit. Demon. Whenever we're talking about ancient literature that is pre-Christian, which this is not technically pre-Christian, but when we're talking, basically anybody but Christians, when you say demon, it just means a sort of spirit, okay? And there are good ones and bad ones, as it says in book 16 of the Corpus Hermeticum. They are some that are helpful, sort of loving spirits, and then there are more warlike and chaotic ones, which are associated with different planets. And it's not, and their evils, you could say, are their essence, he calls them, are expressed through their function. So, and the action itself is a type of evil. So they're not evil in the kind of like, in the way that you would think of evil, typically. You know, they're not sort of these mustache twirling, like, bad guy spirits necessarily. They just happen to have more warlike or destructive natures. That's how they interact more. Kind of in the same way in the Odyssey, how Poseidon is always jacking with Odysseus by sending in storms and wrecking him. You could say that that's a type of evil that he's doing. That's a similar case with these energies. of the cosmos. But let's try to jump back in here. And I believe last time we left off so where we left off, man has not been divvied up into the male and female sexes yet. They're man, speaking generally, humans are hermaphrodites. Reminds you a little bit of Aristophanes' story in the Symposium, when men and women are this sort of like ball thing that rolls around, and Zeus had to separate them because they tried to make war on the gods. That's not what's going on here, but it reminds me of that a little bit. But okay, let's go ahead and jump back in. So all the members of the sensible world continue unto the period of the end, bearing rule and generating. Hear now the rest of that speech thou so much desired to hear. When that period was fulfilled, the bond of all things was loosed and untied by the will of God. For all living creatures, being hermaphroditical, or male and female, were loosed and untied together with man. And so the males were apart by themselves, and the females likewise. And straightway God said to the Holy Word, increase in increasing, and multiply in multitude all you my creatures and workmanships. Be fruitful and multiply. And let him that is endued with mind know himself to be immortal, and that the cause of death is the love of the body, and let him learn all things that are. So learning all things that are is, I think, an important term. Learning all things that are. That could be philosophy and understanding the world around us, right? I think that in a lot of ways, the Hermetic tradition, of course, is very associated with alchemy and alchemical thinking, which is sort of another way of knowing the things that are and searching for the philosopher's stone. The ability to sort of be demiurgic and take base things and turn them into noble things, say lead, a base material, and turn it into gold, which most people associate with alchemy. That's sort of the pop cultural knowledge of alchemy. That was more of a snake oil charlatan type of alchemist. Real alchemists would look down upon these charlatans and sort of not want to associate with them because they were more or less scammers. But I have yet to get into the actual kind of technical Hermetica. I've stuck generally within the more philosophical Hermetica, but these things are connected, okay? And so what I'm saying is that these things kind of, they kind of fit together. And with some of this is the association of materials. Everything is connected, okay? The microcosm of things connect up with the bigger picture, the macrocosm. That's why human beings are associated with the cosmos and God himself. And so since the one which creates everything, or sort of formulates everything in his mind and then creates them through the demiurge and the sun, and since we carry that divine spark, we're able to kind of partake in that energy in some ways within Hermeticism. And there's an interesting passage. I know I keep getting off what I'm trying to read here, but there's a little extra here, book 17, Tat to a King, where Tat tells this king, the physical world is reflected in the mental, and the mental in the physical. That is why you should worship the statues, because they contain the forms of the mind of the cosmos. So taking spiritual things and imbuing them within material things is very much a part of this. And it's a part of Iamblican theurgy as well. That's a big thing. The idea of divine spirits embodying material things is a big part of theurgy, and that's a part of us uniting and sort of getting vitalized by these spiritual powers or energies. You could say there's a similar thing happening with the real presence in orthodoxy, where with the icons and with the liturgies and the burning of incense. So within and a lot of this stuff is actually contradictory. I know I'm going off on a rant. We may not get through this. We may not get through this tonight. So there's a part in this. A lot of these texts, past the Poimander, there's a part in one of the books where it's in the Asclepius, I think, when Asclepius and Hermes are praying to God, and Asclepius asks Hermes whether we should be burning incense in order to praise God and sort of this sort of ritual. And Hermes sort of rebukes Asclepius by saying that is why would God, who possesses all, need some sort of material offering, as if he didn't already own it. It would be like me going into your house and then rummaging through your drawers and finding that you have this really nice Rolex and saying, wow, what a nice Rolex. Here, friend, why don't I gift you this Rolex? It's like, it was already my Rolex. You came into my house and gave me my own Rolex. What are you doing? This is sort of, I mean, it's kind of weird that you would do that, but I mean, it's kind of funny, but God doesn't think that that's funny. Okay, so that's more or less what he says. All right, I'm that's not verbatim. I'm paraphrasing a bit there, but that's the sort of idea that you get. But then later Hermetic ideas seem to differ in some ways, once again with like maybe some more of like the ritualistic stuff. So it's unclear, because in some ways it's like, yeah, we can only approach this simple essence of everything by giving thanks through praise, through prayer, right? Which makes sense. But then, and that sounds pretty Platinian in a way. But then the other flip side of the coin would be the Iamblichus side, right? That we're talking about different things, I know, but that it seems like there's kind of a similar thing going on, and it could just be that, these people, this is a tradition that people have passed down And of course, through tradition, you get different ideas. That's why I reference Platonism, is because it's the same type of thing. Only this is written under the guise of, or attributed to Hermes Trismegistus, if there ever was such a Hermes Trismegistus. Same with Pythagoras. The Pythagoreans would write works under the name of Pythagoras in order not to bring praise to themselves, these individuals, which are Pythagoreans, but to give praise to their master Pythagoras. And so I think a similar thing happens here, and I believe a similar thing happens with the Chaldeans and Zoroaster. Could be wrong about that too. Don't quote me on that just yet until I have more firm knowledge. Correct me if I'm wrong. Where were we? And straight away, God said to the Holy Word, wait, we already read that. Okay. Okay. When he had thus said, Providence by fate and harmony made the mixtures and established the generations, and all things were multiplied according to their kind, and he that knew himself came at length to the superstantial of every way substantial good. Let me just read that again. And he that knew himself came at length to the superstantial, that word keeps tripping me up, to the superstantial, am I saying that right? Yeah, the superstantial of every way substantial good. What I take that to mean, and I could be getting tripped up by the language of this, but coming to the good, to the superstantial good through every way of getting there through the substantial. Could be the case. And maybe some of that plays into some of the astromagical and alchemical side of things, or theurgical side of things. But he that through the error of love loved the body abideth wandering in darkness, sensible, suffering the things of death. And now Trismegistus. Why do they that are ignorant sin so much, that they should therefore be deprived of immortality? Poimander. Thou seemest not to have understood what thou hast heard. Trismegistus. Peradventure I seemed so to thee, but I both understand and remember them. Poimander. I am glad for thy sake, if thou understoodest them. Trismegistus. Tell me, why are they worthy of death that are in death? Poimander. Because there goeth a sad and dismal darkness before its body, of which darkness is the moist nature, of which moist nature the body consisteth in the sensible world. This goes back to what I was saying earlier about that quote from Heraclitus, and the wise soul remaining dry versus the moist soul going down to generation. Okay. The moist nature of which the body consisteth in the sensible world, from whence death is derived. Hast thou understood this aright? Trismegistus. But why or how doth he that understands himself go or pass into God? Poimander. That which the word of God said, say I, because the Father of all things consists of life and light, whereof man is made. Trismegistus. Thou sayest very well. Poimander. God and the Father is light and life, of which man is made. If therefore thou learn and believe thyself to be of the life and light, thou shalt again pass into life. Trismegistus. But tell me more, O my mind, how I shall go into life. Poimander. God saith, let the man endued with the mind mark, consider, and know himself well. And knowing himself in this case would mean knowing God, right? There's something very interesting. I would like to check this out. Carl Jung wrote a book on the psychology of alchemy, and I would very much like to check it out. If any of you have read it, Let me know whether or not this is sounding anything like what Carl Jung was talking about. That's one that I would hope to pick up soon. And that would actually be one of the first Carl Jung books I've ever read. I've read the one that he did on Job, which I thought was very interesting, but I have not delved into Carl Jung. If any of you, I know a lot of you have suggested that I get into Carl Jung, and he seems to have a lot of really interesting stuff on symbolism, which I'm also extremely interested in. Anything esoteric, I'm in with right now. I feel like I'm dipping my toe into an ocean of recondite knowledge. Trismegistus. Have not all men a mind? Poimander. Take heed what thou sayest. For I, the mind, come unto men that are holy and good, pure and merciful, and that live piously and religiously. And my presence is a help unto them. Sounds very much like the Christian Holy Spirit, okay? And forthwith they know all things, and lovingly they supplicate and propitiate the Father. And blessing him, they give him thanks, and sing hymns unto him, being ordered and directed by filial affection and natural love. And before they give up their bodies to the death of them, they hate their senses, knowing their works and operations. Rather, I, that am the mind itself, will not suffer the operations or works which happen or belong to the body, to be finished and brought to the perfection in them. But being the porter and doorkeeper, I will shut up the entrances of evil and cut off the thoughtful desires of filthy works. But to the foolish and evil and wicked and envious and covetous and murderous and profane, I am far off giving place to the avenging demon, which, applying unto him the sharpness of fire, tormenteth such a man sensibly, and armeth him with more to all wickedness, that he may obtain the greater punishment. So he's going to let them over, the ones that deny, that are not pious, that are not just. He will let them be held down by maybe their natal daemon, or the sort of, this sort of demon, right? The spirit that may lead them into these lustful, lascivious, or power-seeking natures, which are void of rationality. And such a one never ceaseth, having unfillable desires and unsatiable concupiscences, and always fighting in darkness, for the demon afflicts and tormenteth him continually, and increaseth the fire upon him more and more. And this kind of very much reminds me of Plato's Gorgias. When Plato is talking to Callicles, and he gives him the example of the jars and the leaky sieve, and sort of suggests to Callicles that more or less Socrates' idea is that, anything but striving towards the good, which is void of these sort of luxuries and these material concerns, it would be a punishment in itself for a man to be unjust and to be plagued by these, what he would consider vices, but they consider to be really great because they don't know what the true good is. So it sounds a little bit like that. And so it's like just getting more and more itches to scratch all the time. And scratching itches feels quite nice in the moment, right? I got poison ivy on my arm. You can't see it, but it used to be really bad. It's held on for about 3 weeks. It still itches. But it used to itch so bad, and I would get in the shower and run hot water over it, and my body would shake in a sort of ecstatic, pleasurable sensation of finally itching this sort of raw, almost wound that I've wanted to itch all day. That being said, if that pleasure that I felt from that is not something that I want to keep up, I actually just want this to go away. Right? So while scratching an itch feels quite nice, the search of things, material, and perverse is like heaping up more and more things to scratch because it feels so good to itch them. But regardless, it is not good to have lots and lots of itches. Okay? All right. Trismegistus. Thou hast, O mind, most excellently taught me all things as I desired. But tell me moreover, after the return is made, what then? The return to the one, right? To the good. Poimander. First of all, in the resolution of the material body, the body itself is given up to alteration, and the form which it had becometh invisible, and the idle manners are permitted, and left to the demon, and the senses of the body return into their fountains, being parts, and again made up into operations. And anger and concupiscence go into the brutish or unreasonable nature, and the rest striveth upwards by harmony. And to the first zone it giveth the power it had of increasing and diminishing. To the second, the machination or plotting of evils, and one effectual deceit or craft. To the third, the idle deceit of concupiscence. To the fourth, the desire of rule and unsatiable ambition. To the fifth, profane boldness and headlong rashness of confidence. To the sixth, evil and ineffectual occasions of riches. And to the seventh zone, subtle falsehood, always lying in wait. So these sort of 7 deadly sins, in a way, that's kind of what this is. The plotting and scheming is one. The idle deceit of concupiscence. The wanting sex and being lascivious. Profane boldness and headlong rashness of confidence, this being full of yourself and wanting to be the best, and the sort of silver, like in the Republic, in the myth of the metals. Into the seventh zone, subtle falsehood, always lying in wait. Miseducation, subtle falsehood, believing the wrong thing, and taking it for truth. Opinion, in some ways, to speak like Socrates. And then being made naked of all the operations of harmony, it cometh to the 8th nature, having its proper power, and singeth praises to the Father with the things that are. And all that they are present rejoice and congratulate the coming of it, and being made like to them with whom it converseth, it heareth also the powers that are above the 8th nature, singing praise to God in a certain voice that is peculiar to them.